biggest thing that I know is that I never thought that this would be easy, but I thought it would be fair.
What if I told you Queen Elizabeth left Meghan Markle nothing except a single plate? That's right. No jewels, no letters, no land. In her private will, the Queen reportedly excluded Meghan entirely, leaving behind only a ceremonial banquet plate from 1961. A move some insiders call the most deliberate royal snub in modern history. Why did the Queen make this decision? What does the plate really symbolize? And how did Meghan react behind closed doors? This story isn't just about inheritance, it's about legacy, power, and a message whispered from the grave. Stay with us. What you're about to hear changes everything. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It started with silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that hung over Buckingham Palace like thick winter fog. Queen Elizabeth II, the matriarch of modern monarchy and the longest-serving sovereign in British history, had passed away. Her reign ended not with scandal, not with war, but with the closing of a chapter that had held together a nation for 70 years. But what came next wasn't peace. It was a whisper, a murmur, that would explode into a thunderclap of headlines, family fractures, and international shock. Not about her jewels, not about the crown, but about one single line in her will that turned the world on its head. According to multiple palace insiders and legal sources now stepping forward, Queen Elizabeth deliberately left nothing of value to Meghan Markle. Not a diamond, not a title, not a countryside estate. Instead, she left behind what is now being called the most insulting inheritance in royal history, a decorative plate used in formal banquets. That's right, a plate. No land, no jewelry, no trust fund for her great-grandchildren. Just a solitary, symbolic token with layers of meaning the world is now scrambling to decode. But why? Why would a monarch known for her restraint, diplomacy, and devotion to duty, someone who welcomed Meghan into the family with open arms and a smile for the cameras, make such a pointed final statement? What was the Queen really saying in those final legal pages that the public wasn't supposed to see? To understand the impact of this revelation, you have to rewind the clock. Back to the beginning of Meghan's entry into the royal world. Back to 2016, when the British media couldn't get enough of her. American, biracial, independent, a divorced Hollywood actress marrying into one of the world's most traditional families. It was a Cinderella story, or so it seemed. At first, the Queen appeared warm. Meghan was invited to Sandringham for Christmas before she even married Harry, a rare exception. The Queen even reportedly allowed her to borrow jewelry for state events, a subtle gesture of trust. But things didn't stay golden for long. Behind palace walls, tensions grew. Stories leaked. Private conversations were made public. Allegations were hurled across oceans. And in the center of it all stood a woman, Queen Elizabeth, watching her family legacy bend under the pressure of modern media warfare and personal betrayal. According to sources close to the royal legal team, the Queen revised her private will months before her passing. The revision didn't appear in the official royal estate documents reviewed by Parliament. Instead, it was tucked into a personal legacy annex not meant for public release. That is, until a palace staff member, who allegedly witnessed the reading, leaked its content to a high-profile London solicitor, who later related to foreign press contacts under strict anonymity. The leaked clause read, in part, to Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, I leave one porcelain banquet charger, last used at the state dinner for the President of Ghana, as a remembrance of formal tradition. That's it. No mention of affection. No language of warmth. No gesture that said, you're one of us. Just a ceremonial dish. An object passed among royalty at events Meghan reportedly found outdated, boring, and even offensive. What followed was chaos. Inside the palace, reactions were reportedly split. Prince William, insiders say, nodded solemnly when the clause was read. He said nothing, but he didn't need to. His silence said everything. Charles, now king, looked conflicted. Sources described him as stone-faced, betraying no emotion. But it was Prince Harry whose reaction left the room cold. He reportedly stood up and walked out before the reading was complete, leaving only a faint whisper, she never gave her a chance. The Queen's decision wasn't just a personal rebuke. It was a statement, one final act of symbolism in a lifetime of carefully orchestrated diplomacy. You see, in royal culture, symbolism matters more than words. A brooch can be a message. A seating arrangement at a dinner table can be a warning. A lack of inclusion in a family portrait? A declaration of exile. So when Queen Elizabeth chose to exclude Meghan entirely from any valuable inheritance and instead gave her a banquet plate, it wasn't an oversight. It was precise, chillingly deliberate. And the public? They didn't know what to make of it. As rumors of the will began to leak across UK tabloids and American media outlets, reactions ranged from shock to satisfaction. She got what she deserved, one royalist pundit commented on a BBC radio panel. This was a queen protecting her legacy. Others weren't so kind. Critics of the monarchy called it petty, vindictive, unbecoming of a woman who claimed to stand above scandal. Some called it racist. Others called it poetic justice. But no one, not a single voice in the public square, could deny its impact. The timing of the leak was equally significant. It came just as Meghan and Harry were preparing for a new media project. A docuseries rumored to explore Meghan's lost relationship with the Queen. Suddenly, the narrative they hoped to control was blown open by a piece of porcelain and the ghost of a monarch who may have spoken louder in death than in life. The symbolism didn't end there. Experts in royal tradition pointed out that the particular plate gifted to Meghan had its own deep history. It was commissioned in 1961 for Queen Elizabeth's state banquet with President Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, a dinner widely seen as a defiant stand against rising racial tensions in Britain's colonial past. The Queen had danced publicly with Nkrumah, an act viewed at the time as revolutionary. That Meghan received a plate from this dinner was, according to one palace historian, a layered statement. Was it an ironic nod to Meghan's race? A reminder of what true diplomacy looks like? Or a cruel joke? The truth may never be fully known. The Queen, after all, never explained herself. But those who knew her best say she didn't need to. Her actions, always quiet but deliberate, carried weight far beyond words. And in this case, she made her position unmistakably clear. The banquet plate was not just a snub. It was a severing. A clear line drawn between tradition and disruption. Between those considered legacy and those seen as fleeting. In the Queen's eyes, Meghan had not just left the family, she had betrayed its values. The Oprah interview. The accusations. The public airing of private pain. The late-night monologues and documentaries. Whether any of it was true didn't seem to matter anymore. What mattered was that the Queen felt her silence had been broken. And in return, she broke hers, in the most royal way possible. But what makes this story even more haunting is what Meghan reportedly told a friend, days after learning of the inheritance. She never saw me. Not the real me. She saw a problem, not a person. It's a heartbreaking line. Because it speaks to something deeper than scandal, deeper than titles or property. It speaks to the very human longing to be accepted, seen, and valued. If the Queen's final act was one of rejection, Meghan's response was one of devastation. But even now, behind all the drama, questions remain. Did Harry try to intervene before the will was finalized? Did Charles secretly oppose the exclusion but lack the power to override it? And what happens to a monarchy when personal pain spills into constitutional legacy? This is not just a story about a plate. This is a story about power, silence, betrayal, and inheritance, not just material, but emotional. It's about what we leave behind and what we take with us when the cameras are off and the crowns are stored away. As we dive deeper into this unfolding story, the question that will follow every revelation is simple, yet haunting. Was this inheritance an act of justice or a final act of vengeance from a monarch who had seen enough? It sat in the velvet-lined box as if it had always belonged there, pristine, untouched, a relic of another time. At first glance, there was nothing particularly menacing about it. It was elegant, crafted with meticulous care, bordered in gold filigree, bearing the royal coat of arms embossed at the center and encircled by a delicate wreath of roses and thistles. A plate like many others in the royal collection. But this one, this specific charger from the 1961 Ghanaian state banquet, had suddenly become a lightning rod of global scrutiny, as the only item Queen Elizabeth II personally left to Meghan Markle in her final will. To the casual observer, it may have seemed like a polite gesture, perhaps a token of inclusion, or a subtle acknowledgement of Meghan's once position within the royal family. But to those familiar with royal traditions and the long history of symbolic communication within the House of Windsor, it was anything but ordinary. In fact, it was layered with meaning, possibly even intended as a carefully coded message to the Duchess of Sussex, one that speaks volumes more than any written rebuke ever could. First, the plate's provenance. It was created for a moment in royal history that has often been praised as one of Queen Elizabeth's boldest acts of political diplomacy. In 1961, as racial tension and post-colonial strife spread across the Commonwealth, many questioned whether the monarchy could maintain relevance in the newly independent African states. Ghana was a key player. At the time, many advisors warned the Queen against visiting President Kwame Nkrumah. Political unrest and fears of assassination were genuine concerns. But Elizabeth, in a display of subtle but powerful defiance, not only visited Ghana, she danced with its president at a state banquet, shocking the world. That plate, designed specifically for the event, was more than porcelain. It was a symbol of cross-cultural diplomacy, of openness in an era of division, of the monarchy's quiet attempts to evolve. And now, that very plate had been passed on not to Princess Anne, who stood beside the Queen during the dinner, not to Charles, whose role as future monarch had close ties with Commonwealth nations, but to Meghan Markle, a biracial American woman whose time in the royal family was defined by turmoil, accusations of racism, and a cultural clash that threatened to rupture the family from within. It was this juxtaposition, the plate's rich political significance versus Meghan's explosive exit from the royal household, that raised so many eyebrows. Why would Queen Elizabeth leave Meghan such a piece? Why not one of the many other, more neutral items in her private collection? A brooch? A book? A set of teacups, even? Why this? To many observers, the answer is clear. It was not just a token. It was a statement. According to a prominent British royal historian, who spoke under condition of anonymity, the plate selection was likely deliberate. The Queen didn't do anything casually, he said, especially not in her personal matters. If she chose that plate, it was because she believed it said something about Meghan's place in history, or rather, her lack thereof. The symbolic interpretations fall into several categories. There's an eerie stillness that often accompanies devastating news, a strange numbness, almost like a void, that swells before the emotions arrive. For Meghan Markle, that moment came not with a dramatic phone call or a public statement, but in the quiet confines of a Montecito estate, thousands of miles from Buckingham Palace. And what she heard was simple, precise, and cutting. The Queen had left her nothing, not a trinket, not a letter, not a whisper of acknowledgement, only a ceremonial plate. According to a close friend of the Sussexes, Meghan had known there would be tension surrounding the Queen's will. In her heart, she anticipated a modest exclusion, a gentle distancing that would align with the palace's frosty approach since the couple stepped back from royal duties. But nothing had prepared her for what actually transpired. The idea that the most powerful woman in the royal family, the very monarch who had once smiled and welcomed her into the institution, would reduce her memory to a porcelain plate felt like a brutal contradiction of everything she believed about their relationship. The call came from Harry. He had attended a private meeting regarding the will, separate from the formal family estate proceedings. Meghan had stayed behind, believing it best to let him face the family alone. It's probably all formality, she reportedly told a friend the night before. I don't expect anything major. We left. I get it. But what she received wasn't indifference. It was something more surgical, more deliberate. Harry's voice, when he called, was low and halting. He struggled to find the right words. She left you a plate, he said. Meghan was silent for several seconds. Then she responded, a what? He repeated it. Just a plate. The one from the Ghana banquet, 1961. It was in a velvet box with your name on the label. Meghan, confused at first, asked, is that all? And Harry, now clearly angry, answered, that's all. Everyone else got heirlooms, paintings, jewelry, and got the brooch set. William got the Windsor portraits. Catherine got the sapphire tiara. You got a plate. The fallout was immediate and deeply personal. In the hours that followed, Meghan reportedly fell into a silent spiral of disbelief. There was no public statement, no PR team alert, no media response. Just an aching silence inside the house. Staff described her as quiet but visibly shaken. She took long walks around the property, mostly alone. One aide observed that she didn't eat for nearly a day after the news came in. It wasn't the object that hurt, said a source close to her. It was the message. She felt erased. Later that evening, Meghan allegedly asked Harry to read the full passage again, the wording of the clause in the annex. As he did, her face fell deeper into confusion and pain. As a remembrance of formality and tradition, the Queen had written. It was that phrase, those particular words, that seemed to slice more than the exclusion itself. Formality. Tradition. Two things Meghan had always found cold and suffocating. Now they were being handed back to her, immortalized in porcelain, as a parting shot. Meghan reportedly said softly, "She never saw me for who I was." And Harry, equally bitter, responded, "She never tried to." But some insiders offer a more complex view. According to one former royal aide familiar with the Queen's temperament, this may not have been as personal as it appeared. The Queen's gestures were always symbolic, the aide explained. She never shouted, never accused. But if she disapproved, you'd know. This plate, this choice, was her way of saying Meghan didn't fit the mold. Not because she didn't try, but because she didn't want to. Meghan, however, saw it differently. She believed she had tried. She had curtsied. She had followed protocol. She had worn the hats, studied the royal wave, memorized the pecking order. She had accepted the relentless press scrutiny, the criticisms of her clothes, her accent, her race. And still, she was left with nothing but a relic from a time that had no place for her. In private, Meghan reportedly cried that night. Not a dramatic display, not a breakdown, but a slow, steady weeping that took her by surprise. "It just hit her," said a friend. Not that she didn't get anything, but that even in death, the Queen couldn't offer her kindness. Harry was furious. His anger simmered just below the surface. "She's still my grandmother," he reportedly said, "but I don't know if she was fair." He didn't speak to Charles for several days after the reading. Tensions between him and William also worsened, particularly when he learned that William had received not just heirlooms but explicit messages of legacy in the will, a direct inheritance of paintings that once hung in Queen Mary's drawing room, coupled with a note about continuing tradition. Meghan, by contrast, received an object without explanation or encouragement. The couple's team debated how to respond. There were discussions about a public acknowledgement, perhaps a dignified thank you, paired with silence. But Meghan refused. She reportedly told her aides, "You don't thank someone for handing you rejection wrapped in velvet." In the days that followed, the media storm intensified. Paparazzi camped outside the Montecito estate. Headlines blared. Queen ghosts Meghan Markle snubbed from beyond the grave, only a plate for the Duchess. Meghan was trapped. If she stayed silent, she looked bitter. If she spoke, she'd seem petty. Either way, she lost. Behind closed doors, Meghan and Harry had long discussions about the meaning of the gift. Was it revenge? Was it a warning? Or had the Queen simply written Meghan out of history in the most polite way possible? Meghan asked Harry, "Do you think she hated me?" And he answered, "No. I think she resented you." That might be worse. Some within royal circles suggested the move was to protect the family from future embarrassment. There was speculation that Meghan, if given jewelry or valuable heirlooms, might feel entitled to leverage them in her future projects or memoirs. Others suggested the Queen feared that any substantial bequest could be interpreted as a political endorsement of Meghan's worldview. A worldview that directly challenged the institution she had spent her entire life preserving. But to Meghan, all of that felt like justification. Excuses layered on top of rejection. "They'll always find a way to explain cruelty," she reportedly told one friend. "Especially when it's quiet." Harry, meanwhile, became more withdrawn. Sources say he began second-guessing many of his choices. The interviews, the documentary, the tell-all book. He wondered if it had all been worth it, said a palace insider. If speaking their truth had ultimately cost them everything, including the respect of the Queen. Still, not everyone in Meghan's circle saw the event as entirely negative. Some believed it gave her closure. That the plate, strange as it was, allowed Meghan to see her place in the royal narrative with unfiltered clarity. No more guessing. No more wondering where she stood. It was a line drawn in porcelain, said one commentator. A message that said, "You are no longer of us." The couple considered what to do with the plate. For days, it remained untouched on a side table in the study, still in its velvet-lined box. Meghan reportedly couldn't bring herself to open it again. "It's just a thing," she said. "But it's everything." There were whispers that she might return it, or donate it quietly to a museum. But ultimately, it was locked away. A relic of a chapter she no longer wished to revisit, but one that would forever follow her. There is no simple way to process rejection from a global icon, especially one who once represented grace, dignity, and grandmotherly steadiness. Meghan had hoped, perhaps naively, that death would soften the Queen's judgment. That time might have blurred the edges of their disagreements. That in the final reckoning, there would be a gesture of reconciliation, no matter how small. Instead, she received a plate, a fragile, decorated, haunting reminder that in the eyes of the crown, Some people are simply not meant to belong. To truly understand why Queen Elizabeth II excluded Meghan Markle from her will, it's not enough to simply look at the event in isolation. This was not a sudden act of retaliation. It was the end result of a long, painful unraveling, one that began with grand expectations, slowly disintegrated through miscommunication and public spectacle, and ultimately solidified into quiet, final judgment. The story of how Meghan went from royal bride to royal outsider is a tangled web of protocol, perception, and personal wounds, one in which every decision had consequences far deeper than any single moment. The beginning, ironically, was filled with hope. In late 2016, when Harry and Meghan first became publicly known as a couple, the British monarchy was quietly optimistic. Meghan brought diversity, Hollywood glamour, and a modern sensibility to a centuries-old institution struggling to remain relevant in the digital age. The Queen was reportedly briefed extensively on Meghan's background: American, divorced, biracial, an actress with a clear sense of activism and media savviness. At first, she was said to be curious, cautiously welcoming, not unlike her early relationship with Princess Diana. But unlike Diana, who had entered the royal family as a naive teenager still shaped by aristocratic British tradition, Meghan was a fully formed adult. She arrived with opinions, expectations, and a well-developed sense of self. The Queen appreciated confidence, but she valued deference more. And that, according to insiders, was the beginning of the rift. The early cracks began with protocol. Meghan, unfamiliar with royal customs, often pushed against them, not maliciously, but instinctively. Her approach to public engagements was casual and conversational. She once reportedly hugged a child during an official visit, something seen as endearing in the US, but unconventional in the stiff formalism of the monarchy. She asked direct questions in palace meetings, voiced concerns about tradition's rigidity, and even suggested modernizing aspects of royal communication, including overhauling the media strategy to engage younger audiences. These ideas, while forward-thinking, were received with quiet alarm. The Queen had spent her life preserving an image built on mystery, not transparency. For her, the monarchy's survival depended not on relatability but on distance, on an almost sacred aloofness that elevated the crown above the noise of public discourse. Meghan's approach, open, vulnerable, and fiercely expressive, threatened to pierce that veil. Still, the Queen tried to accommodate. She invited Meghan to Sandringham for Christmas in 2017 before she and Harry were even married, an unprecedented move that broke with decades of precedent. Meghan attended official events, stood beside the Queen, smiled for the cameras. But behind the scenes, frustration simmered. One aide recalled a moment when Meghan reportedly asked whether she could just say what she feels during a formal speech. The room went silent. The Queen had spent 7 decades saying very little. That restraint was not only tradition, it was strategy. Things escalated further during the wedding preparations in 2018. Tensions reportedly flared between Meghan and palace staff. There were arguments about the tiara, the guest list, and the role of her father. Some reports suggest Meghan clashed with senior courtiers who found her difficult and demanding. Meghan later countered this portrayal, suggesting that many in the palace simply weren't used to a woman who spoke up and expected to be heard. But to the Queen, the noise around the wedding, a ceremony that was supposed to project unity and celebration, was already becoming disruptive. After the wedding, the Queen hoped for quiet. She wanted the newlyweds to settle into their duties, to represent the crown with grace and consistency. But what followed was a media circus. Meghan and Harry became global celebrities. Their every move was analyzed, often unfairly. Racist undertones seeped into tabloid coverage. Meghan's background, her style, her facial expressions all became fodder for public debate. In 2019, the couple announced they were suing several British tabloids for invasion of privacy. This shocked the Queen. She had endured a lifetime of media scrutiny without legal retaliation. Her approach was always the same: absorb, ignore, continue. Meghan and Harry's decision to push back was seen not just as unorthodox, but as reckless. Then came the turning point: the South African tour. At the end of what had been a successful diplomatic trip, Meghan gave a candid interview, speaking openly about her struggles within the royal system. "Not many people have asked if I'm okay," she said. The words landed with a thud back in Buckingham Palace. For the Queen, who had spent decades maintaining composure through war, death, and scandal, Meghan's public vulnerability was viewed not with sympathy, but with quiet disapproval. It broke the golden rule: never complain, never explain. The final rupture came in early 2020 when Harry and Meghan dropped their bombshell announcement. They were stepping back from royal duties. The Queen was blindsided. She reportedly received only minutes' notice before the news was posted publicly. To her, this was not just poor manners, it was betrayal. Discussions about a part-time role for the couple quickly fell apart. The Queen made her position clear: you are either in or out. They chose out. The Queen's response was swift but tactful. She released a carefully worded statement expressing love for Harry and Meghan, but making it known that their royal duties would cease. Titles would remain, but patronages would be returned. The Queen hoped the matter was settled, but the drama was just beginning. In 2021, Meghan and Harry sat down with Oprah Winfrey. The interview rocked the institution to its core. They spoke of racism, mental health struggles, isolation, and suicidal thoughts. They accused a member of the royal family of expressing concern over their unborn child's skin color. Meghan said she was denied help when she felt suicidal. Harry described his father as distant. The Queen's household was portrayed as cold, indifferent, and at times, cruel. Though the Queen responded with her trademark poise, recollections may vary, the damage was done. The firm felt publicly dragged. And the Queen, whether fairly or not, was seen by many in Meghan's corner as complicit through silence. But behind palace walls, the sentiment was different. The Queen felt ambushed. She believed the interview was a public execution of family bonds. She viewed Meghan's words not as courageous confession, but as weaponized grievance. And to her, there was no greater sin than disloyalty. That was when the Queen reportedly began revisiting the personal annex of her will. According to insiders, she called 2 trusted advisors and began outlining her final wishes, clarifying who would receive what and why. For most recipients, the Queen expressed affection, gratitude, and hope. For Meghan, she simply left the banquet plate, with no elaboration. Why the plate? Why not nothing at all? Some believe the Queen wanted to avoid appearing vengeful. By leaving Meghan anything, she avoided complete erasure. But others believe it was a final rebuke dressed as a formality. A reminder that Meghan had once participated in royal events, yes, but only ever as a guest, not as a successor, not as family in the truest sense. There is another layer to consider: the Queen's loyalty to the institution. For her entire life, she had upheld the monarchy's survival above all personal feelings. Even in her relationship with Diana, the Queen struggled to balance love with duty. When it came to Meghan, who had publicly challenged the very idea of monarchy, the Queen may have decided that protecting the institution required drawing a line. Duty comes before everything, the Queen once said in a private moment. And in this case, that may have included setting an example for future royals, that the crown forgives, but it does not forget. Interestingly, the Queen never spoke to Meghan again after the Oprah interview. Though there were formal letters exchanged, there was no phone call, no private meeting. Meghan later said she hoped for reconciliation, but it never came. In the Queen's view, reconciliation had to be earned, not requested. Even Harry, despite remaining in touch with his grandmother, found himself at a distance. He called her often during her final months, and they shared private conversations. But insiders say he avoided raising the topic of the Oprah interview or the fallout. He knew her silence on the matter was not passive. It was definitive. When the Queen passed, Meghan was not present. She remained in the United States with their children. Harry traveled to Balmoral alone. He arrived after her death. And though he was allowed to grieve with the family, the atmosphere was undeniably cold. The exclusion from the will was simply the final seal on what had already become evident. Meghan was no longer part of the family. Not in a legal sense, not in a ceremonial one, and certainly not in the eyes of the woman who had once smiled at her across garden parties and balcony photos. What went wrong between Meghan and Queen Elizabeth was not one moment. It was the slow, irreparable breakdown of expectations and values. Meghan expected empathy. The Queen expected loyalty. Meghan spoke loudly. The Queen believed in silence. Meghan wanted change. The Queen believed in preservation. And when those two worlds collided, something had to give. In the end, what Meghan received wasn't just a plate. It was the embodiment of an irreconcilable divide, a symbol of everything the Queen stood for and everything Meghan pushed against. In the royal family, silence is power. But there has always been one exception to that rule: Princess and the Queen's only daughter. Known for her bluntness, unwavering loyalty to the crown, and near-militant sense of duty, and has always played the role of the royal family's quiet enforcer. She doesn't smile for the cameras unless necessary. She rarely engages in gossip, and when others skirt controversy, and walks directly into it, with precision, intention, and no apologies. Which is why, according to multiple palace sources, she may have played a far more pivotal role in Meghan Markle's exclusion from Queen Elizabeth's will than the public has ever been told. While Queen Elizabeth preferred subtlety and patience and was the opposite, she had little tolerance for drama, emotional outbursts, or anything that seemed to challenge the monarchy's internal code. When Meghan Markle entered the royal family and didn't roll out the red carpet, she didn't offer the warm embrace the media often expected from a sister-in-law. She watched, quietly, critically. And over time, her quiet reservations hardened into serious concern, especially as Meghan and Harry's approach to royal life diverged from tradition. But it wasn't just Anne's opinion that mattered. According to close aides, she was present during at least one key conversation between Meghan and Queen Elizabeth that would later become the subject of intense scrutiny. It was in this meeting, several insiders claim, that Meghan allegedly made statements about future plans that contradicted her public image and clashed with palace expectations. And was not just a witness. She became a validator of truth in the Queen's mind. And her words carried significant weight. The moment reportedly took place in late 2019 during a private luncheon at Windsor Castle. Meghan and Harry had returned from their Africa tour, and the Queen had invited them for a quiet conversation, and was also present, along with a senior palace advisor. The setting was informal, but the tone was serious. Queen Elizabeth, concerned about the emotional strain evident in Meghan's interviews and press statements, sought clarity about the couple's future role. According to a staff member who later recounted the event under anonymity, Meghan expressed interest in stepping back from some public duties while retaining select titles and private patronages. She reportedly spoke passionately about having more control over her schedule, her causes, and especially her media engagements. At one point, she used the phrase, "We want to reimagine what modern royalty looks like." The Queen was polite but firm, and, however, wasn't so restrained. She reportedly responded with a single sentence that changed the dynamic in the room. "You don't reimagine the monarchy. You serve it." The silence that followed was palpable. Even Harry, usually defensive of Meghan, seemed caught off guard. Meghan, trying to explain further, suggested that modern audiences wanted more transparency and authenticity from royal figures, and didn't flinch. She shot back with a biting observation. "Authenticity without loyalty is vanity." From that moment on, Anne's position was clear. She didn't trust Meghan, not because of her background, nor her nationality, but because she saw Meghan's approach as fundamentally incompatible with the institution their mother had preserved for nearly a century. In the months that followed, Anne reportedly shared her concerns with Queen Elizabeth directly. Unlike other members of the royal family, Anne had a unique level of access to the Queen, not just as a daughter, but as a trusted confidant. Their daily schedules often aligned. They rode horses together, shared afternoon teas. Their bond was built not on emotion, but on discipline. If Anne saw something that threatened the crown, she said so, and the Queen listened. When the Oprah interview aired in 2021, it confirmed Anne's deepest fears. Meghan's words about racism, neglect, and palace coldness were not, in Anne's eyes, just personal grievances. They were attacks on the Queen's integrity. And reportedly described the interview as a betrayal clothed in victimhood. Her private conversations with the Queen after the broadcast were said to be some of the most serious they had ever had. And, according to palace insiders, said plainly, "You must not reward that behavior. Not in life. And certainly not in legacy." This statement, uttered with Anne's characteristic sharpness, became a turning point in the Queen's decision-making regarding the personal annex to her will. While the Queen never confirmed it directly, several aides say it was after this conversation that the decision to leave Meghan out of the will was finalized. The banquet plate, chosen weeks later, was added as a form of symbolic closure. Anne's influence didn't stop there. In the weeks leading up to the Queen's death, she was present for several private estate planning discussions. Though not a legal advisor herself, she sat in on meetings with the Queen's private secretary and personal solicitor, offering quiet input on legacy planning. She made no legal claims. She asked for nothing for herself. But when Meghan's name came up, she said only this: history should not be rewritten for the comfort of those who refuse to learn from it. It's important to note that Anne has never spoken publicly about Meghan. She has never given an interview on the topic. She has never commented on the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, or any tabloid speculation. But those close to her say her silence is strategic. It's not ignorance, it's condemnation wrapped in restraint. In fact, there's a long-standing royal saying attributed to Princess, and the louder they speak, the less they know. Many believe this was her private critique of Meghan and Harry's media approach, where they offered televised vulnerability and offered stoic commitment, where they sought healing through exposure and believed in healing through duty. These clashing philosophies, laid bare during the royal fallout, explain much of the hostility that simmered beneath the surface. There are also reports that Anne once confronted Harry directly about Meghan's behavior during a private lunch at Clarence's house, shortly before the couple announced their departure from senior royal roles, and allegedly warned Harry, "She's leading you away from everything your mother wanted for you." It was a painful moment. Harry reportedly stood up and left the table without a word. Whether Anne's words were justified or too harsh remains a matter of debate. But what's undeniable is the role she played in shaping the Queen's final decisions. Where Charles may have wavered, and William remained cautious and was decisive. She didn't lobby for Meghan's exclusion. She didn't whisper behind her back. She simply laid out the facts as she saw them, and trusted the Queen to act accordingly. In the aftermath of the will's contents becoming public, Anne has maintained her silence. But her friends say she feels no remorse. One reportedly quoted her as saying, "You don't dishonor my mother's legacy and walk away unchallenged." This line, now echoing in palace corridors and press rooms alike, has become symbolic of Anne's quiet campaign to preserve what she sees as the monarchy's core values. And if the Queen's final act of symbolism, the inheritance of a lone banquet plate, is anything to go by, it appears Anne's influence ran deep. Yet not all reactions to Anne's role have been favorable. Critics argue that her rigidity, while admirable in loyalty, has helped drive a wedge deeper into an already fractured family. Some believe her influence made reconciliation impossible, that her old-school understanding of monarchy prevented a more modern, flexible response to Meghan and Harry's concerns. But Anne has never claimed to be a reformer. She sees herself as a guardian, a steward of something much older and larger than herself. And in her mind, Meghan crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She didn't just speak out, she challenged the foundation. And for Anne, that was an act that demanded response. To this day, Anne continues to attend hundreds of royal engagements each year, often without fanfare or coverage. She works in silence. She speaks only when necessary. But her fingerprints, quiet and firm, can be seen across many of the monarchy's most pivotal decisions, including the one that left Meghan with a single, unspoken message delivered through China. It may not have been Anne who signed the document, but her presence, her certainty, and her history with both the Queen and Meghan ensured that when the decision was made, it was made with clarity. A clarity forged not in hatred, but in a belief that some boundaries, once crossed, cannot be forgotten. For most of his life, Charles lived in the long shadow of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, the unwavering figure of duty and grace who ruled longer than any monarch in British history. While she embodied stability, Charles was often cast as the complicated heir, introspective, occasionally misunderstood, and forever awaiting his turn. When he finally ascended to the throne following his mother's death, he inherited not only a crown, but also the final echo of her judgment, one that included Meghan Markle's exclusion from the Queen's will. The world watched closely to see how the new king would respond. Would he approve? Would he defend it? Or was there a part of him quietly burdened with guilt? In the days following the Queen's passing, palace sources observed that Charles moved with a peculiar blend of grief and precision. He had prepared for this moment for decades. But as he stepped into the role of sovereign, he also became the executor of a legacy that he had no power to alter. His mother's final decisions, especially those captured in the personal annex of her will, were beyond contest. But they were not beyond reflection. According to two senior palace aides, Charles had reviewed the contents of the personal annex several weeks before his mother's death. Though not required to approve it, he was briefed on its provisions, including the solitary gift left to Meghan. Those close to him describe his reaction as reserved, bordering on pained. He did not dispute the decision, nor did he ask for changes. But he did ask one question: will this be understood? It was a telling moment. Charles, long known for his philosophical nature and deep concern for perception, understood the symbolic weight of his mother's choice. He knew that Meghan's exclusion would not be seen in isolation. It would be connected to everything, from the Oprah interview, to the Sandringham summit, to the public fallout that had fractured his family's reputation. And perhaps most of all, it would reflect on him, not just as a father, but as a king. Still, he made no move to intervene. Why? Because Charles, despite his public image as a man of sensitivity, had always operated within the royal framework of hierarchy and restraint. To challenge the Queen's final will, especially so soon after her death, would have been seen not only as disrespectful but destabilizing. And Charles was determined, above all, to begin his reign without controversy, even if that meant remaining silent. Those close to Charles insist that his silence should not be mistaken for coldness. Behind palace doors, he reportedly wrestled with the emotional toll of his mother's decision. One former advisor recalls him saying, "She did what she felt was right." That doesn't make it any easier. This wasn't the first time Charles found himself caught between Meghan and the monarchy. In fact, he had once been one of her few defenders. Early in Meghan's relationship with Harry, Charles was among those who encouraged the match. He welcomed Meghan to family gatherings, walked her down the aisle at her wedding when her father was absent, and praised her charisma and charm in private conversations. He even envisioned Meghan and Harry becoming vital ambassadors for the Commonwealth, helping modernize the monarchy for a new generation. But as tensions grew, so too did Charles's disillusionment. He was caught in the middle, between a son growing increasingly resentful of the institution and a mother who viewed loyalty as a non-negotiable requirement. When Meghan and Harry began breaking protocol, engaging in unauthorized interviews, and eventually stepping back from royal duties, Charles's position shifted. He reportedly urged moderation. He asked them to wait, to reconsider, to give the system more time. But they moved forward with their own agenda. The split became inevitable. By the time of the Oprah interview, Charles had largely retreated from personal involvement. He did not watch it live. He received summaries from aides. What disturbed him most, according to insiders, was not the discussion of racism or isolation, but the suggestion that he had abandoned his son. The narrative hurt him deeply. Charles saw himself as a man who had, in his own way, tried to hold the family together during immense stress. Meghan's accusations, particularly about the royal family being indifferent to her mental health, reportedly left him quietly devastated. So when the Queen made her final judgment in her will, Charles understood it. He may not have celebrated it, but he respected her decision. And in doing so, he may have believed he was preserving the greater good of the monarchy. Because for Charles, the institution comes first. Always. But that decision did not come without emotional cost. After the will was privately read to the family, sources say Charles made a point of pulling Harry aside. The conversation was brief, tense. Aides say Charles told Harry, "This is not how I wanted things to be." It wasn't an apology. But it wasn't a dismissal either. It was a rare glimpse into a man torn between love and legacy. Harry, reportedly still furious over the contents of the will, said very little. He listened. Then he walked away. The palace has never officially commented on Charles's view of the inheritance. When asked by reporters if the king had approved of Meghan's exclusion, the response was vague. His Majesty respects the private wishes of Her late Majesty the Queen. But privately, whispers tell a more complex story. One longtime royal observer noted, Charles is not a cruel man, but he is a pragmatic one. He believes in course correction through consequence. He may have felt that Meghan and Harry needed to face the reality of their choices. Still, the optics weighed heavily. Even members of Charles's inner circle expressed concern. One aide reportedly said, "We can't afford to start this reign with division. We need to find a path forward." And yet, no path was publicly offered. There was no reconciliation effort, no overtures of peace. Just a continuation of the quiet distance that had defined the family's approach to the Sussexes since their departure. What complicates Charles's position even further is his own legacy. As a man once mired in scandal, mocked in the press, and painted as cold and calculating in the wake of Diana's death, Charles has spent the last 2 decades rehabilitating his image. He wants to be remembered not just as a monarch, but as a reformer, a bridge between tradition and modernity. And yet, in this moment, he stood by a decision that many viewed as archaic, punitive, and exclusionary. There's an irony here that cannot be ignored. Charles, once cast as the outsider within his own family, is now the ultimate insider, upholding decisions that alienate others. The man who longed for empathy as a younger royal now struggles to extend it. The king who speaks of compassion in speeches often withholds it in private. Is this contradiction a flaw or a necessity? Some say Charles has no choice, that the burden of kingship demands detachment. Others believe he missed an opportunity to lead with grace, to offer Meghan something, however small, that might have softened the blow. But Charles did not move. He remained still, composed, and above all, loyal to the Queen's will. Yet there are signs of internal conflict. Charles has reportedly kept the banquet plate that was bequeathed to Meghan under lock and key until further notice. It was supposed to be shipped to California along with other ceremonial items. But as of last report, it remained at Clarence's house. He's delaying it, said one source. He says it's a matter of logistics. But some believe he's reconsidering whether it should be sent at all. This small act, if true, suggests more than administrative delay. It hints at doubt, at a man who perhaps sees the consequences unfolding and wonders if silence was enough. In public, Charles continues to present a united front. He appears at engagements with Camilla, speaks of service and continuity, and avoids questions about family tension. But in private, the strain is visible. His relationship with Harry remains strained. His contact with Meghan is reportedly non-existent. And yet, the loss of that bond, while never fully admitted, haunts the backdrop of his early reign. The Queen made her decision. Charles did not oppose it. But in the court of public opinion, the question remains, was his silence complicity or a form of grief? Only Charles truly knows the answer. But in the palace corridors, behind the closed doors of ancient tradition, the silence continues to speak volumes. If King Charles's reaction to Queen Elizabeth's final will was marked by internal conflict and restrained dignity, Prince William's was reportedly something else entirely, measured, quiet, and disturbingly unfazed. To some in the palace, his lack of emotion was seen as the calm resolve of a future king who understood the gravity of protecting the monarchy. To others, it was evidence of a long-hardened heart, one that had already made peace with the idea that Meghan Markle was never truly one of them. From the beginning, William was skeptical. Long before tabloids exploded with stories about Megxit, and long before Netflix deals and televised interviews shattered what was left of royal unity, William had his doubts. Unlike Harry, who was instantly captivated by Meghan's charisma and independence, William approached her arrival into the family with caution. According to insiders, he expressed concerns to Harry early on, not about Meghan's race or nationality, as has sometimes been assumed, but about the speed of their relationship and what he called the collision of two worlds. You don't just marry a person, William reportedly told Harry. You marry the institution. And she's not ready for that. That remark, which Harry is said to have taken as judgmental and patronizing, became a deep fissure between the brothers. But from William's point of view, it wasn't an insult, it was a warning. And in his mind, time would prove him right. As Meghan and Harry's royal journey unfolded, William watched with increasing discomfort. Meghan's modern, expressive approach to duty clashed sharply with the more measured and traditional tone that William and Catherine had been carefully cultivating for years. While Meghan and Harry spoke in candid emotional terms, William kept his thoughts closely guarded, only showing warmth during controlled public appearances. His commitment was never to personal narrative, but to the crown itself. This difference in worldview, public authenticity versus institutional discretion, fueled a subtle yet relentless rift. Every time Meghan gave an impassioned speech, posted a personal essay, or allowed cameras behind palace walls, William reportedly saw it as one more crack in the monarchy's armor. Not because he was jealous or threatened, but because he believed in preservation above popularity. By the time Queen Elizabeth began updating her will, William had already emotionally detached from Meghan. In private, he rarely mentioned her by name. According to a former senior aide, he referred to her simply as her, a linguistic distancing that said more than any outburst ever could. So when the Queen made her decision to exclude Meghan from the will, choosing instead to leave her a solitary ceremonial plate from the 1961 Ghana banquet, William did not blink. He neither encouraged nor contested the choice. He accepted it as an inevitability. And perhaps more surprisingly, he reportedly viewed it as merciful. That term, according to palace staff who overheard his private comments, was not sarcasm. In William's eyes, the Queen had exercised remarkable restraint. She could have erased her completely, he reportedly told a trusted confidant. But she left something. That says everything. To outsiders, this statement reads cold, even brutal. But within the royal family, where gestures are coded and silence often replaces confrontation, William's reaction was standard practice. He was raised under the doctrine of emotional discretion. He had watched his mother Diana suffer under the media microscope. He had seen his father mocked and misunderstood. He had been taught that survival meant knowing when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. That discipline showed during the reading of the will. When the clause concerning Meghan was read aloud, William gave no outward reaction. He sat still, hands folded, eyes fixed. While Charles appeared visibly conflicted and Harry reportedly stormed out, William remained composed. After the reading concluded, he quietly thanked the solicitor, turned to his father, and said, "She protected the crown until the very end." He wasn't referring to himself. He was referring to the Queen. This moment cemented something that had been building for years. William saw Meghan not as a victim of the institution, but as someone who challenged it, recklessly, publicly, and permanently. And in his mind, the Queen's final gesture wasn't vindictive. It was accountability. Even so, William was not entirely immune to the implications of the fallout. According to one aide, he knew the press would seize on the inheritance story and frame it as cruel. "They'll call it petty," he reportedly said. "They won't understand what she had to endure." By she, he meant the Queen. There's a historical weight to William's loyalty. He had spent much of his life preparing for the role of heir apparent. With that role came a unique sensitivity to royal legacy, especially that of his grandmother. She had mentored him privately for years, quiet discussions after Sunday services, walks through the Balmoral Gardens, strategic debriefings after high-profile tours. Through it all, the Queen had impressed upon William one central belief: the monarchy must survive scandal by outlasting it, not by engaging it. This belief was severely tested by Meghan's public accusations. William took particular offense to the implications of racism within the royal household. While he never directly confronted Meghan, his response to the allegations, "We are very much not a racist family," was delivered with a level of icy defiance that surprised even royal correspondents. The trust between William and Harry had long since ruptured by that point. But after the will was executed, the division reached an unspoken point of no return. Harry reportedly confronted William in a private corridor after the reading, asking him, "Did you know she'd do this?" William, in his usual clipped tone, responded, "It wasn't up to me. But she was right." The brothers haven't spoken directly since, at least according to royal watchers close to the family. In public, William has kept his distance. He has made no mention of Meghan in speeches, interviews, or press releases. At official events, his composure has remained intact. But body language experts and keen observers have noted a distinct lack of warmth whenever the subject of Harry and Meghan arises. It's not just discomfort, it's calculated disengagement. Even Catherine, usually the warmer and more diplomatic of the pair, has offered no public sentiment on the inheritance snub. Insiders say that she and William agreed early on to maintain a unified front. That meant no commentary, no leaks, no interpretation, just silence. But silence does not mean neutrality. Those close to William say he fully supports the Queen's final decisions, not just because he agreed with her, but because he understood the cost of doing otherwise. William believes in lineage, in honor, in the long game of history. And in his view, Meghan threatened all of that. She brought emotion into diplomacy. She broke the code of quiet endurance. She questioned the structure that William had spent his life learning to protect. And worst of all, from his perspective, she did it publicly. For William, the Queen's gesture was not about Meghan as a person. It was about principle. By leaving her the plate, and nothing more, the Queen created a symbolic boundary that could not be crossed again. And William, already stepping into the Queen's shoes as the next guardian of that legacy, saw it as an essential act of clarity. There are those who believe William missed a chance, that in choosing duty over empathy, he reinforced the very walls that Meghan had tried to scale. Some believe he could have been a bridge between generations, between cultures, between worlds. But William never saw himself as a bridge. He saw himself as a pillar. And pillars don't bend. Whether history judges him harshly or not remains to be seen. But in this moment, William has made his choice. He has aligned himself fully with the Queen's decision, and by extension, the institution she spent her life protecting. He believes that loyalty, not sentiment, will secure the future of the crown. And in the end, that belief, cold or not, is what will define him. Prince Harry has always been the royal paradox, born into a life of rigid hierarchy, but carrying within him the restless spirit of a man who never felt entirely at home within it. He was the spare, the second son, the brother not destined for the throne. Yet for many years, Harry seemed content to fulfill that role with laughter, loyalty, and a strong sense of purpose through his military service and charitable work. He was beloved by the public, regarded as the fun, relatable royal who could balance both tradition and modernity. But behind that ease was a man burdened by grief, longing, and a quiet desperation for autonomy. Meghan Markle didn't create that desire, she magnified it. When Harry fell in love with Meghan, it wasn't just the start of a romantic relationship, it was the ignition point of a transformation. Meghan didn't merely represent a partner, she represented a departure. A world outside the stiff corridors of royal protocol. A woman with her own voice, her own brand, and a refusal to shrink to fit someone else's legacy. In Meghan, Harry saw not only a chance to start fresh, but a way to redefine his purpose altogether. Yet from the moment their relationship went public, the strain between personal love and royal duty began its relentless tug-of-war. At first, Harry tried to keep both worlds intact. He took Meghan to meet the Queen early. He worked to integrate her into royal life with speed and excitement. He hoped, perhaps naively, that the institution would make room for her, that the monarchy, in all its pomp and rigidity, would bend just slightly for the woman he loved. But almost immediately, the signals were clear. Adaptation was expected of Meghan, not the other way around. As headlines piled up, often laced with racism and misogyny, Harry's protective instincts kicked in. He saw echoes of his mother, Diana, vilified, misunderstood, hunted. The tabloids that had hounded her now stalked his wife. When Meghan tearfully told him during the early months of her pregnancy that she felt unprotected, it crushed him. "I couldn't do anything," Harry would later tell a friend. "I saw the same pattern playing out, and no one in the family stepped in." The real fracture began when Harry started challenging the palace from within. He requested more control over media interactions. He asked that Meghan be shielded from certain events. He questioned advisors who had long been fixtures in his grandmother's inner circle. But the walls were impenetrable. Meghan was expected to conform, not question, to absorb the pressure, not push back. And when she didn't, the whispers began, about her being difficult, entitled, American. Harry, in defending her, began to drift further from his own family. By the time the Queen began making revisions to her personal annex, Harry and Meghan were already plotting their exit. They had relocated to Canada, then to California. The announcement that they were stepping back from royal duties came as a shock to the public, but insiders say the Queen, William, and Charles had sensed it coming. What they hadn't expected was the finality of it, or the defiance that accompanied it. In palace terms, it was not just a departure. It was a break in the chain of obedience that had kept the monarchy intact for generations. And Harry, though convinced it was the right thing to do, was left adrift. No longer a working royal. No longer a British citizen in the day-to-day sense. And now, after the Queen's will, a man whose wife had been symbolically rejected in the most silent yet significant way. When Harry learned about the contents of the will, he reportedly was alone with Charles, William, and the Queen's legal team. The room was still, tense. The clause naming Meghan was short, precise, and final. One object, the ceremonial plate from the Ghana state banquet. Nothing else. According to a palace aide who was present during that reading, Harry didn't speak for several moments after the clause was read. Then, in a voice more pained than angry, he muttered, "That's it." Charles said nothing. William, expressionless, turned his gaze to the floor, and, ever stoic, remained fixed on the document. Harry stood up. Without raising his voice, he reportedly said, "She gave her everything she had, and this is what she gets." No one responded, and Harry, eyes damp but jaws set, left the room before the reading was finished. In private, Harry's reaction was far more intense. Sources close to him say he was shattered. He had long harbored hopes, perhaps unrealistic ones, that the Queen would offer Meghan a gesture of reconciliation, even a minor heirloom, a note, a small act of grace. But the message sent was unmistakable. Meghan had not been forgiven. Or worse, she had never been accepted at all. Back in California, Harry tried to shield Meghan from the worst of the fallout. But the headlines were everywhere. The story had leaked, as these things often do, with enough detail to confirm its authenticity and enough vagueness to fuel speculation. Meghan, as Harry later confided to a friend, was devastated in a way I hadn't seen before. The couple spoke for hours in the days that followed. Meghan, always composed in public, allowed herself to weep in private. "It's not about the plate," she told Harry. "It's that even in death, she wanted me to know I didn't belong." Harry was caught in a spiral, torn between loyalty to his wife and the lingering weight of his upbringing. He had loved the Queen dearly. She was more than a monarch. She was his grandmother, his compass.